love springs. Springs are so cool. Let's forge some knives. Springs. Look at these springs. These are awesome. Look how big they are. Oh man, I'm so excited about this. I've been thinking about this for a long time. And there's been some problems in doing this, and let me talk about them real quick because it's really important to note at least a few things. First is that these springs are, not only are they carbon steel, so they're not stainless, they're not some sort of complicated alloy, they're just carbon steel springs. They're also uncoated, so they don't have any finish on them. They're not galvanized, they don't have any plating, which is sort of hard to find in springs that aren't stainless. So this took a long time to find, but I'm super pumped. They look like they're alive or something. The next thing to notice is that I chose the diameters very carefully. So the internal diameter of the smallest one, or the external diameter, is smaller than the internal diameter of the next to smallest one, so they fit inside each other. And then this one fits in the next one, and the next one, and so on, and so on, and so on. So the plan is to like put them all inside of each other and then forge that together. It's gonna be really cool. We have some things to consider though first. The first thing we have to think about is the fact that these gaps are open. And this spring, it's not like I can compress that by hand and forge it shut, you know, just like, as you can see on the smaller ones, those gaps are very small, and it's not going to make a big difference, and whatever. But these gaps, you know, I'd really like to close those gaps before forging, so I have a more solid piece, and things forge weld better, and, you know, so on and so on. So that's problem number one. The second issue is, how am I going to forge them? Am I just going to put them around each other concentrically, then take them over and forge them in the open air, which I could do? Or could I put it in a canister, close it up, put some powder in there, and fill up the gaps? Okay, I'm going to think about this a little bit here. I want a piece that's 6 inches long, right? That's the billet I want to start with. And each of these is 0.18 inches, basically. So if I want a 6-inch piece divided by 0.18, that means I have to have 33 of these to get 6 inches if I compress them all together. So if I count that out, that's basically, it comes to right about, it's half the spring. So I'm going to use half the spring, compressing it to get this to 6 inches. It's a 36-inch spring. I get half of it compressed. So that's a lot of spring to compress. Like, how am I going to, I have to do it in stages or something. Trying to tighten these down in a vise while I torch out their temper isn't working. It's just, you know, it's just not working. The spring's springing everywhere, and ugh. So it's time to use my expert fabrication skills to make a tool. Hey, you're smart. You're asking, why not extension springs? They're already compressed and tight. And the answer is that I couldn't find any that weren't coated and whose internal and external diameters made it possible to get more than 2 or 3 inside each other, which is sort of the gimmick here. So I had to make do with these compression springs, and that was just sort of the end of the story. I've decided to tack weld a few points along the side to help keep it from squirming when we take it to the forge. Fortunately, the other springs aren't as powerful, and it takes much less effort to get them coiled. In the small spring here, I'm going to put this 1/16 inch 01 steel rod as our center core. The plan right now is to weld these two pieces of mild steel on the ends so that I can twist the spring tighter in the vise while it's red hot before forge welding it to close up the gaps. Hey, here's a sneak peek at spring knife number 2, by the way. I've put these springs in different canisters, each with different powders to fill the gaps. 1095 powder, 1095 plus iron powder, iron powder. Yeah, some pretty cool test pieces right there. Which one do you think would look better in the final knife? Alright, the moment of truth. Let's get these springs into the forge. We're going to heat them up, twist them to tighten them down a little bit, then we'll bring them up to forge welding temperature and see what we can do. Alright, you can sort of see that it's just going to pull apart like a wrecked slinky. I've only tack welded the outer spring together at a few points, and really the entire length of the spring should have been beaded together with weld on several sides. And so you can see that I'm really just stuck here. It's not clear to me in this moment if I should continue or just concede defeat. This was really a major miscalculation on my part. Ultimately, I decided to push ahead and see what happens, but there's really some big issues here. The first is that the smaller pieces of spring make their way further from the main coil and they cool more rapidly there. And you know, even if they're at forge welding heat inside the forge, by the time they get to the anvil, they're no longer at forge welding temperature. And so they just sort of hang out there and accumulate scale. So the goal here now is to get everything in tighter proximity so that the billet will actually maintain heat for forge welding. The springs have also given us an enormous amount of surface area that likes to scale, meaning I have to constantly brush and flux the piece. The chances of this becoming a truly solid billet are basically zero at this point. But let's see where it takes us. Alright, well I've cut out some of the wonkier bits here. We're left with about 3 semi-usable pieces of our coil billet. I'm going to forge them together, draw that out, and we'll use that as an outer layer for a San Mai style knife with a 1084 steel core. Why the core? Because this billet is just not going to cut it. It's too porous and it won't form a cutting edge of any quality on its own. So we'll get this forged together, drawn out, and apply a good knife steel core to that and make a San Mai style knife. So there's our billet on the left we just made and drew out. We have a white chalk line there where we're going to cut it in half and apply each of 1/2 on either side of that 1084 steel core on the right. You don't really typically do a lot of profile forging on a sand my billet, and I think it's even risky to do bevels in a lot of cases because you can thin out that core and distort it, and it sort of drifts off center if you're not very careful, so that when you grind the edge, things can get pretty wonky. But I'm trying to thin it out here so that maybe the cutting edge and the pattern are in closer proximity that way. I'm not sure it works. In fact, I think it may cause some problems here. Well, this is it. Ground to 200 grit, lightly etched. As you can see, the core is not well centered at all. The gaps in our spring are significant and visible, and well, I'm just not that impressed. I may polish it up later and take another look after more etching, or, more than likely I'll just throw it out. But for now, I'm focusing on spring knife number 2, the canister version. I'll see you guys in that video soon.